Causality and experiments, and we have, so Edo's not here, but we have both Cosma and Steve here, and Marcus hopefully will be arriving. And so I wanted to say just a few things. So one theme that comes out in terms of, and Arun alluded to this morning on sort of the first slides, we're faced with enormous amounts of observational data that we're trying to make sense of. And observational data comes with its difficulties in sorting out things like causality and also just figuring out exactly how to make sense of the data that we have. And I wanted to sort of point out, three major issues that we face, and I think will be touched on in the discussions that we go through. One is how do we select which parts of graphs we see or which parts of the world we see. And so there's basic sampling issues that are associated with trying to envision the world that we're going to be trying to estimate things from. So we don't necessarily see all of the network. We could be seeing it with measurement error, but also we have design issues of exactly who we should be talking to and how we should be sampling things. And there's ways in which this can be done so that things are unbiased, and there's ways in which things can be done so that there's biases. And so I think just being aware of the fact that we're not always getting a perfect look at the world and figuring out how we can design things to best get the data that we need to get an unbiased or a correctable estimation of the world is sort of an important topic, and that'll come up quite a bit here. A second, so that's one form in which things could be biased from what we're looking at. A second is endogeneity. And this was an issue that came up in the morning session. And networks form for specific reasons, and they could be forming based on latent variables that we're not observing, and those could correlate with people's behaviors. And so ultimately, if we're trying to predict why people are friends or why they're behaving in certain ways, if we can't see those latent variables, we might be missing important pieces of the puzzle. And so trying to correct for selection issues is sort of an overriding problem. And the ability of us to try and infer what might be causing certain kinds of relationships and correct for that is an active area of research and a difficult one, and also leads to the value of having controlled experiments. So the kinds of things that Michael was doing this morning, where one instead actually observes the network formation and observes the process completely, allows for us to then control for those things at some cost of putting things in a laboratory. One other thing I wanted to talk about was sort of serendipitous that this came last night by email. So this is an issue that scientists don't like to talk about, but this is the American Economic Association has now launched a registry for randomized controlled trials. What does this actually do? It means that if you want to do an experiment and you have to lay out your design before you go to the field and start collecting data, right? So the idea is that I'm not going to be able to ex post figure out what I'm going to actually run and exactly what questions I'm going to ask. I have to give you the design and post the design beforehand, then I can go out into the field and do it. And then we don't have a selection bias of what gets reported and what gets put into the literature. And this is done just for randomized controlled trials, but we could imagine doing this quite generally for empirical work. And I think it's sort of a selection bias that is on top of all the issues that we normally worry about, but is another important one to sort of keep in mind.
What are the consequences of ignoring this?
No, so actually this is a curious thing. First of all, they did it just for randomized controlled trials. Secondly, it's completely voluntary. And so all you can do is you stick stuff out there, and then ex post, what it does is it disciplines you if you write the paper differently. Now you have to explain why you didn't do what you set out to do.
They provide like a timestamp or something.
Yeah, exactly. So it just gets posted, and then there's a timestamp, and then you can, now some people can see that, in 2013, Matt posted this as his research design, and then he published a paper in 2015, and somehow the paper doesn't look like the design and what happened in between. And so it disciplines you not to be doing something ex post that you weren't intending to do ex ante.
Limit on how many designs you can do.
Yeah, you're right. So you can post a lot of it, but it's the idea that it's completely public is somehow disciplines us to be careful about thinking through exactly what the design is ex ante and not be selecting research ex post. So that's something else for a little bit outside the session itself, but I think an important one.